You do not need every member of your executive team walking around focusing on culture every other hour. I know they're busy. I know what they do. What you have to have is somebody on the staff that does focus on it, and you have to make sure that your executive team members are at least supportive.
Welcome back to Nabity on Business. I'm Dave Nabity of Nabity Business Advisors. And one of the things we're going to talk about today is your management team ready? If you already have them in place, are they capable? What sort of challenges do you have to get that management team to grow and work their way up into the C-suite position so they can effectively run the company? And when we do a lot of succession and estate planning, we get into the numbers, we get into the valuations, we look at the people from a top-line standpoint. We're going to talk more about that. But a lot of times, if it's a family-run company and mom and dad are selling the company to the next generation, it's essential that that next generation be the kind of leaders that can help the company be successful so that over a long period of time, the company will thrive and grow. And in a lot of these family businesses, mom and dad sell the company on time, on installments. So, mom and dad could have a 10-year installment plan. And if the kids run the business in the ground before mom and dad get all of their money, it can be a huge, huge problem, especially if they're in their 80s at that point. So having a capable team that's competent, that shows the right kind of leadership is really, really important. And so we do our work on the succession and estate planning, and we bring in outside firms to help with the leadership coaching and the business development with the mindset of the management team. And joining me today is Kim Hoogeveen from BetterCulture, a company called BetterCulture. And they have a trademark on a system and a service they provide called Mindset. Kim, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dave. I'm excited to be here. It should be fun.
Glad to have you on board. I learned about you through Lisa Roskins, who runs Burlington Capital, and I was talking to Lisa and saying, I really need to find the right kind of people to go in and work with our clients. And Lisa says, you're the guy she calls all the time. And so I got all kinds of respect for Lisa. And so it's been a pleasure to get to know you. Tell us a little bit about how you got started with your company.
Well, it goes back, Dave, to early to mid 80s. I had an opportunity to help start a company here in Omaha called QLI. It's a specialized rehab center for young adults with brain injuries.
Young adults?
Young adults.
Okay.
Young adults. It's grown to be the largest center of its kind in the nation now. But I was the first employee, which is how you get to be CEO. If you're the first guy in, you get to take any title you want. But over those 24 years I was there, we really focused heavily on how can we go about building a culture that can attract, build, and retain phenomenal people, put them in a work environment they love. And we ended up getting a fair amount of recognition for that. I think 5 times #1 best place to work in Omaha, et cetera. When I was ready to transition, I had a superstar working for me, and I think sometimes CEOs stay too long. I didn't want to stay too long. So I handed off the keys.
That's interesting you say that, because a lot of people don't have that self-awareness.
Well, it's far better to leave 3 years too early than 3 months too late. It's really critical that you recognize that. And it's also helpful if, in my case, I had this superstar working for me that I'd promoted 4 times. There was only one job left to put her in, and I was sitting in it. So she was ready.
Oh, yeah.
And so I handed the keys off to Patricia Kearns, who did a phenomenal job the last decade. And I decided I wanted to take what we had created and implemented at QLI, this approach to training, identifying managers and training managers so that we could build a culture that would be powerful enough to propel our business to great success. I wanted to take that and work with some other companies. So I set off to do that, and the last 14, 15 years has been a wonderful ride.
Tell me what is the most rewarding part of you doing this kind of work as opposed to just doing another startup?
Sometimes I don't think wisdom always comes with age, but sometimes age helps a bit. When you look back on a career, actually the most rewarding parts for me, and I think for a number of people, just sometimes you don't realize it early enough, isn't the extra 2% bottom line in 1993.
How much you had in the checkbook?
Not really. It's I love sports analogies, Dave, and think of a coaching tree. And you'll get some exceptional coaches who are really proud of their win and loss record, but what they're even more proud of is the assistants that work for them that went on to be phenomenally successful.
Yeah.
And so what I was always looking for is, in my world, maybe creating this coaching tree. And so I always believe that ultimately, if we want our customers to have phenomenal services from our company, you have to start with make sure your employees have a phenomenal experience within the company. And if you get that right, it will drop down to that culture, that customer experience as well. So for me personally, the most rewarding part is being able to hire someone that maybe on a 1 to 10 scale is a 5 in terms of caliber of employee, and maybe even that not a 5 in terms of the pathway they're going in life, but because they had a chance to work with us, because they had a chance to come into our environment, not only were they more successful in work, but they found a more successful pathway in life.
Oh,
and
no question.
Ultimately, that's the real, I think, pride you get out of having, leadership gives you power. The only question is how you're going to use it. And if you can use that power to help someone find a better pathway in life, ultimately, you're pretty proud to have done that.
Having an impact on people is really the only thing that really matters when it's all said and done. And how much you've got in your brokerage account and what kind of beating your chest about what the revenue is you're creating. For me, it isn't about the money anymore. It's about having people that you've really made a difference in their lives.
I think that's true. But the nice thing about this is, and we work with our clients all the time and tell them, look, I'm an unabashed capitalist. I want to be successful, bottom line, in the business. But this is one of those rare opportunities in life. You don't have to choose between treating people well or having a good business. You can actually have your cake and eat it too.
Good point.
You can have both.
Great
point. And that's
point.
the big opportunity that's there.
Yeah, I agree with you. Now, when we go in and do succession planning for companies, we look at doing the valuation, then we look at the people. Primarily, mom and dad are looking at transitioning the stock to the next generation. And you might have one child in there that's really, really capable. You might have one that's very, lazy. You might have one that's chemically addicted. I mean, you can have all sorts of different things going on in there. But a lot of times you'll have somebody that is really capable, but they're young. And they need 5 years or so of development in order to be ready for a CEO position. And if you throw them into that role too fast, you can have real problems. Tell me a little bit about what kind of symptoms. If you're an owner, you're running a company today, you think you've got your kids in a good position to be able to take over, what would be some of the symptoms that you'd see that says, we've got to get them outside counsel? Maybe they've been counseled by dad and mom, and their worldview on running businesses is very narrow. What are some of the things that you'd see that if a father or mother that owns and runs a company is listening, that would be a clear sign that it's time to get some outside help?
That was a complex question. When you start with that question, talking about the difference between the preparedness of those individual kids to step up, there's really no substitute for self-awareness. And some people have...
On their part or the parents' part?
Both. But it usually starts with the parents. And the parents are going to have to be tough enough to recognize who's ready to step into that kind of role. And, parenting isn't always... Sometimes there is tough love. And the ultimate goal here and the success for all those kids is that the company do well. And so having the wisdom and the backbone to make that call is really essential.
Well, Kim, I got to tell you, I see more often than I want to see parents that have a level of blinders on about whether Junior is capable of really becoming the CEO. They love the child. They want the best for the child. But, we've got questionnaires. I could talk about some of the things that we do to get to the bottom of what's going on. But I see a lot of parents that aren't very self-aware as to what kind of a situation they really have. So part of my job is to say, time out. here are the 10 things that we need to have in a CEO for the next generation, and you got 5. Sometimes it gets me fired because the parents just don't want to hear. And I'm not saying I am 100% right on everything I do. My assessment could be wrong. But more often than not, when we start asking good questions, and I could give you an example of what some of those are, I find parents are not very self-aware. That's why I asked you the question, what kind of symptoms would you see? And, for me, it's like, how well does the I call him a child. I hate to do that. Young adult. How well do they understand finances and the financial statements and how you should be dealing with payables and receivables and managing sales and marketing and making sure that your accounting staff is on top of things? If they're out of their league there, that's kind of a problem. The other thing is do they present themselves well as an adult? Could they walk into the banks and get $1 million loan to help finance the expansion of the warehouse? Do the senior leadership that are 50 plus that got 10 more years to work, sometimes they only have 5 more years to work, do they respect the child? Those sorts of things kind of jump out at me. And if I don't see that happening, but I believe the young successor has a good heart and a real desire to grow and expand their wisdom and knowledge, they got to get outside help to do it.
Well, what you're really talking about for part of that, Dave, is executive presence. And one of the things we do in working with clients is to take a look at, do they have that executive presence, which you're talking about? And many times they're going to be younger than some of the people they're supervising that have been there quite a while. And so credibility is a big issue. And there's some very strategic things you can do to improve the likelihood of that credibility. And then there's also some things you need to really avoid because it's going to absolutely shoot you in the foot with that stuff. A couple things, though, I would, when you were talking, it pinged a couple things for me. When that transition happens, the parent, obviously, and built the business, is going to make a lot of calls. But they can also be instrumental in helping that transition be more or less successful in terms of what they do to facilitate that transition and build the credibility of that handoff. But you're seldom going to have anybody, certainly wasn't me when I went into my role as a CEO, you're seldom going to have anybody that's 10 out of 10 on all 8 things that it's really important you know.
Yeah.
That's why I came back and said, but self-awareness is critical because what you want to do is to make sure that you're bringing people in either to as employees or as outside consultants that are phenomenal in your weakest areas. And so one of the real strengths in terms of when I first went into my role at QLI, like I said, I was the perfect CEO except for 2 things. I didn't know anything about brain injury and I didn't know anything about business. But other than that, I was the perfect guy.
You had a good heart.
But I was well aware I didn't know those 2 things. So I had the opportunity to bring phenomenal people in to help me in that. The one thing, though, that the third leg to the stool that we got right is culture. Did you build a culture that would attract and retain phenomenal people? Because if you don't get that right, I don't care how good you are technically, I wouldn't want to be invested in that business.
It makes you wonder how many people really think about culture. I don't hear it brought up very often.
Or if they do, you'll see executives kind of roll their eyes because it sounds soft.
Yeah.
But then I go in and say, well, let's take a look at your customer satisfaction. Let's take a look at your employee turnover. Let's take a look at your insurance rates. Let's take a look at those factors and see if it doesn't dramatically impact your bottom line. And imagine if your culture was twice as strong, what that would do for your business. And I am convinced it is often overlooked, but frequently with exceptional companies, it's the secret sauce. The other thing that we run into with particularly startup companies is what worked at an early stage in terms of leadership approach. As they grow, they tend to be slow to modify what you have to have in that CEO or leadership role because it's different leading a company of 20 than it is when you get to a company of 250.
Yeah.
And so what worked in the past doesn't necessarily work going forward.
Well, this is what I was going to ask you. Let's assume we go down 2 journeys. Journey number 1 is a company that's worth $30 million. They got 3 kids in the business. They might have an executive team of 5 or 6. And the parents are in their mid-60s and it's time to really transition, what sort of a journey would you take that company on from a culture training standpoint?
It's a great question. We would start with assessment, because if you don't know where your culture presently is, it's really tough to put any kind of plan together for improvement. So we would start with an assessment of where they are now. And
now, I've heard all sorts of different ideas about what an assessment is, and there's no end to, if it's strength finders or DISC or what kind of assessment do you guys do?
We use two things. One, we couldn't find anything out there when we built our company that we really thought went deep enough and was practical enough. So one of my sons is an actuary. I'm a psychologist by background, so it sounds like a bad joke. An actuary and a psychologist walk into a bar.
How do you get those guys in the same room?
We decided we would build our own instrument, and it has been exceptionally successful for us. So if we want to do a survey of staff and get information, that will work. The other thing, though, that I think is often missed is we will sit down with the executive team, and we have an assessment of 48 individual items that we ask for them to give us feedback on where are you with your recruitment process? Where are you with your evaluation process? What are you doing in terms of compensation planning? A whole myriad of ideas and issues that we go through with the executive team to get an assessment of where their strengths are and where we have opportunities for growth. Everything we do with our clients is not looking for problems. We never find problems. We just find where are their growth opportunities. Only semantic difference, but it makes a big difference in that room when you take that executive team through. One other thing I want to mention before we go any further, though, it's often wise to not overlook what's the dynamics within the executive team. If those dynamics aren't functional, that's frequently the first place you want to start in terms of building culture. Because
that's a symptom. That's
big time.
You're giving me a symptom of
big time symptom. And sometimes if you have the right personnel, we can come in and work with that team to improve those dynamics. Other times, to be blunt, you need to make changes. And that takes some vision and courage and also the wisdom to know what you need to bring in to make that team more functional. It is difficult to overcome a dysfunctional executive team and trying to build culture down through the organization.
Let me ask you this. This is kind of off topic,
Sure.
But do you find that when you have a situation like that the person that is not the right fit, they start to squeeze the owner? And what I mean by that, they can be asking for more and more raises when they shouldn't be getting them. They want stock, they want this, they want that. One of the things I've noticed, a symptom of somebody that needs to be let go, is they just put too much pressure on the owner for their economics and their status and those sorts of things, that they end up becoming so self-focused that they end up not getting along and being a team player over time. Do you see that?
Absolutely. And I think it's easy to, let me give you a study that I found interesting. It's the Wall Street Journal interviewed 100 ex-CEOs, open-ended questions, which you get all kinds of answers about a lot of things. But one of the questions they asked I found fascinating, which was, tell me your biggest regret in your career as a CEO. And they got all kinds of answers. But they categorized them, and the number one, it was 18% of the responses, which is quite a bit to an open-ended question. But 18% of the responses was, I went too long with someone before I made a change.
Yeah.
And they frequently said, I was afraid. I thought they were so critical. I just couldn't move. But what you frequently find is about a week later, you're saying, my goodness, why did I wait so long?
I know. And it's because you're nice. And because
you're nice, or you're scared.
People.
Or you're scared. You're afraid they're so vital that how could I get along without them?
Yeah.
It's one or the other.
Yeah, I do see that. The journey, you do the assessments.
Yep.
What comes behind that?
Behind that, we're going to sit down and ideally, if it's a full client, if we're going to work completely with them, we're going to ask them to let us work with them to develop what we call a strategic plan for cultural health. And so it's going to start with, let's take a look at what I mentioned before, how well your executive team functions, how well it's populated, how well it functions. Number two, which is really critical, let's talk about how you're selecting people to go into supervisory positions and what are you doing to prepare them to be able to lead human beings well. Frontline supervision is where culture really is built day to day and protected day to day. It's great the CEO is terrific, but the way an employee feels about the company is going to be about 70% determined by their relationship with their immediate supervisor. So we've got to get that right. The next thing I want to look at is your day-to-day operations. Let's see what we're doing with HR, with accounting, the things like your onboarding, your recruitment, things I mentioned earlier. What are they doing to contribute to a healthy culture? Then we're going to want to take a little bit of look at how are we identifying rising stars within your company, and what are we doing to give them more opportunities to become, not only to achieve more, but to become more tied to the company, because the last people we want to lose are those rising stars employees, those people that you say, thank heavens they work here when you go home. And then the fifth thing we're going to take a look at them is we have some ideas that you can do with all your employees. What are they experiencing day to day? And have we clearly set out the attitudes and behaviors that we are going to expect from every employee to make sure we're creating the workplace environment that people are going to truly value? So that's a diagram that we put together, and we take that team through those 5 stages.
Is that strategy different for an executive team of 10 versus you got 200?
Nope.
It's the same thing.
The process would take longer, and the process will be different. But making a plan for that strategic health wouldn't change. The one other thing that I'll mention, a lot of companies go after this sort of by, I call bibliotherapy. The owner was on a plane and read a magazine and, hey, we should try this Thursday. And they kind of jump from thing to thing to try to address culture.
Fad. What's the new fad?
The latest fad. You build culture by the aggregation of small things. It isn't one big lecture. It isn't one big gathering. It's having a plan that we can consistently implement over time to build and protect a healthy workplace culture. And when you get that right, it becomes an incredible strength for your company.
What do you say to somebody that says, oh, you know what? We've got traction, and we've read the book. We got the facilitator, so traction's taking care of everything. We don't need anything else. What would you say to that?
If you're a public company, I don't want to own stock.
Elaborate.
Traction is a good system, and it's helpful, but it doesn't address the cultural aspects,
the human
aspects,
human mind and heart.
And
right?
It's much easier it's easier to learn or to measure how well we're doing with our IT. It's easier to measure or to even learn what to do technically with HR to make sure payroll gets processed. It's not all that hard to learn how to read a balance sheet. It's really not, to be honest with you. But in all of those areas, your HR leader, your IT person, your CFO, do you know what they all have? They all have outside consultants to go to. That HR person calls the HR attorney when they run into a real difficult process. They all know where to go to get outside expertise, and they all have tools to make sure they operate well. And lastly, hang with me, they all have power. Your CFO wouldn't be very effective if he had no power to implement. Or your HR person, she wouldn't be very effective if, but she has zero power. Managers ignore her. So let's go now to look at culture. Do you have someone driving this vitally important part of your business that knows something, really knowledgeable? Number 2, do you give them tools to be able to be effective, training, etc.? Number 3, who do they call when they run into a challenge? And then lastly, have you given them the power to be able to make an impact? Those 4 things have to be there with every one of those areas. And frequently, when you look at what are you doing with culture, you just told me culture is vitally important. Good. Who's in charge of it? What do they know? What tools do you give them? Who do they call when there's a problem? And have you given them power? And they look at me blankly. And I say, and then you wonder why your culture is not very strong.
One of the things that we've done, we've got a whole IT team that's built a whole technology. We call it kind of the war room technology, where the executive team can look in real time what's happening with all the economics, all the finances, and be able to make real time decisions, built, dashboards and strategic analysis over what's happening on every phase of the business and the finances of the business. Doesn't have anything to do with culture.
No.
It has everything to do with providing real-time information so the business people can make better decisions. And I could see something like that coordinating well with what you're talking about, because it would bring that meaningful information into the room where the people that you're working on from culture can make better business decisions.
Absolutely. And I want to make sure I'm clear on this. You do not need every member of your executive team walking around focusing on culture every other hour. I know they're busy. I know what they do. What you have to have is somebody on the staff that does focus on it. And you have to make sure that your executive team members are at least supportive. Sometimes I talk about if you're putting on a play, you don't need the superstar to come in and help build the set. But you can't let the superstar come in and knock it down every afternoon. That is a killer. That is a killer. So there has to be attitudinal and behavioral standards that also apply to the people on that executive team, because that sends a message to that organization, whether we're serious about this or whether it's just something printed on the paper that comes out once a year in the annual report.
So since our firm doesn't do the culture building like you're talking about, I mean, we can do a lot of the assessments to see whether we have the right people in the right seats to be able to take over this business when the parents are ready to transition out. But I've gotten burned by coaches and leadership people that I've introduced to clients that I thought were going to do a really good job, and they end up just flaming out. And you've got everything from people that have been successful in business that they think they're going to be a great coach, and they just don't invest the time to develop the relationships you need to have. And sometimes it's just having a heart-to-heart relationship where people know you're sincere, you care, and you're going to stick with them through the process. Other times you have guys that maybe they ran a church or something, and all of a sudden they're a great leadership coach. Mm-hmm. And so I've seen the gamut. The nice thing that I like about your organization is not only have you've been successful in business, but you've built a curriculum that, you have a roadmap where an owner can see where we start and where we're going to be when we get close to the end, so that you don't have somebody that you're paying fees for 2 years and everything is just kind of, carrying on without real measurable results.
Well, you are.
Does that make sense?
You're spot on. It's a truism that a lot of really phenomenal athletes, Magic Johnson, for example, decided he was going to coach for a while. Just because you could do something exceptionally well does not mean that you can teach it exceptionally well. And in fact, it might even be a hindrance because you can't believe they can't see how obvious it is to make that path, to do what they need to do. We spent 10 years building out a very structured curriculum to help. It sounds a little bit poetic, but what we say is we're going to take you on a tour through the minds of exceptional leaders. We're going to show you what they know and how they think.
I love that.
And then we have created the video programs behind it, the training programs that ideally, sometimes they want us to come in and do the first few trainings with groups of executives. But what we ultimately want is we want somebody inside that organization to take our curriculum and they teach it as their leadership program within that organization. So we want it transferred into the bloodstream of that company. And so that's what we do with our long-term best clients. And it's been really successful.
On the front end, you spend quite a bit of time with the key people to lay the foundation of relationship, right?
Yep.
And then you build on it with the curriculum.
Correct. And we frequently look for, and they help us identify, who's going to be the driver within this organization going forward. And that person then keeps highly connected with us. Remember the things I said that they need is they need to know a lot of knowledge. They need to have tools. But I said they need to know who to call when they run into the unusual thing. That's the role we love to play.
Yeah.
That we're the outside consultant then as they have opportunities or challenges arise that they weren't anticipating.
Well, that's awesome. I appreciate you being on. If people want to get a hold of you, what's the best way to do it?
Best way is just go to betterculture.com, and the contact information is all right there. This September, we're going to have we only do it once a year, a 2-day intensive program on the 7 principles of leadership, how you can go about leading in a way that'll attract, build, and retain phenomenal people. We're going to sell out with about 100 people. The information's at the top of that website as well if people would like to join us.
When is that?
September 24th and 25th, right here in Omaha.
Would I be allowed to come?
We would love to have you there.
All right.
I might put a few restrictions on you.
Yeah, but keep me in the back and make sure I don't have a microphone near me, right? Listen, I appreciate you being on. That's Nabity on Business. I hope you've got a lot out of that, and we'll look forward to giving you more content like we did today here in the future podcast. So thanks so much for watching.